morning. You know, as this crisis wears on, I can feel the stress level rising. Maybe you're the same way. You can feel it within yourself, this growing angst about what's going to happen. How long is this going to last? Like, if this was going to be 2 weeks, I could do it, but now it feels like the walls are closing in. Maybe you're worrying about your job situation, or maybe your layoff and whether CERB is going to cover your amount for the month, whether you're going to be able to pay rent. Maybe you're looking at people's Instagram pages, well-intentioned parents who are telling you all the things you should be doing with your children, but you clearly aren't, and you're feeling some guilt. Maybe you blew up at your spouse the other day, or someone in your household. Maybe you've been taking your stress out on your kids, but I think all of us are struggling here. You know, as a pastor who's been helping people with their emotional, spiritual, mental well-being for now decades, and having helped thousands and thousands of people find greater peace, greater joy, I often reflect on how do I help people grab hold of the life that is truly life. I don't know if you're a faith person, whether you believe that the Bible is the Word of God and that Jesus rose from the dead and gives us new life, or whether you're just tuning in because you saw that I was going to give you a helpful mental model. Either way, welcome here. You know, a couple of years ago, I was fishing through some internet, information, a really cool article. Something caught my eye, and I started reading it. It was a study by some Harvard psychologists who did a test running over a number of years on thousands of respondents to measure and think about and evaluate what they were doing with their brains. And this is what they found. The average person spends 46.9% of their waking hours thinking about being somewhere else or doing something other than what they're doing. Okay, just think about that. 46.9%, 47% of your time, you're spending, the average person is spending thinking about doing something other than what they're doing and being somewhere other than where they are. Now, when I read that, I went 47. Like, okay, maybe there's some like loopy kind of people out there that are doing this, and they're like sucking the whole average higher, and so this is probably skewed like most research is. So I did what anyone in my position would do, probably not. I actually looked online, and I found that the study was still ongoing. And what you could do is you could download this app, and it would send you information like ping, ping, ping throughout the day, random times throughout the day, and would ask you, what are you thinking about? And, how are you feeling about what you're thinking about? And so I did this. I think it was a 2-week period, ping, 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 ping throughout the day. And when the results came back, I was really similar to the rest of the pack. It was not 47%. I can't remember what the exact number was, but it was pretty close. I went, dang, I guess I'm doing it too, right? So 46.9%. Well, this led me to dig even more into their findings, and I'm going to read some of those to you now. They go on to say that our mental lives are pervaded to a remarkable degree by the non-present. They go on to say, unlike other animals, humans spend a lot of time thinking about what isn't going on around them, contemplating events that happened in the past, might happen in the future, or may never happen at all. Now, I know we can get into debates about our dogs and whether they can think outside the present moment. I can pretty much assure you that my dog can't. It's like, feed me right now. That's all there is. All there is eating, And, or if I give, if we throw a piece of popcorn on the ground for him to eat, it's like he's never had one. And now he's like, please give me just one piece of popcorn. Just one. Give me just one. Give him one. Thank you. Just one. It's just, there's always present moment. Part of what it means to be human is the ability to not be present in the present moment, to think about something that isn't happening, or to think about the past or the future. So they go on. A human mind, they say, is a wandering mind. And catch this, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, they conclude, adding that the ability to think about what is not happening is a cognitive achievement that comes at an emotional cost. And then finally, mind wandering is an excellent predictor of people's happiness to such a degree that how often our minds tend to leave the present and where they tend to go is a better indicator of our happiness than the activities in which we're engaged. Now, most of us, when we're unhappy, the first thing we think of doing is, I need to do something different, right? So if I don't like doing this and I'm not happy, I need to stop doing that and I need to do something else. And it makes perfect sense, except what they found is that it doesn't really matter what you're doing. It matters more where you're going. In other words, where your brain is focused. Now, we spend so much time, 47% of our waking hours, being somewhere other than where we are, and the more we do it, the less happy or the less joy we have. This is really intense. But it also highlights something that our brains can do. Now, all of us, at some level, are time travelers. I know that sounds kind of trippy, and you might be like, I'm not a sci-fi person. It's not about sci-fi, it's about real-fi. Because, listen, every single one of us are traveling through time right now. 60 seconds, a minute, 60 minutes, an hour, 24 hours a day, right? Our bodies are locked into the tick-tock of time. Now, whether you think that time is a real thing, like Thoreau said that time is a realm in which we abide, which is what I tend to think, or you think, no, it's just a mental construct. Either way, the ticking of the clock measures our lives. We are bound to this thing, and we're all moving through time at the same pace, physically. But mentally, we're not bound to time. And here's what I mean. We've been alluding to it already. Your mind can leave the present moment, and it can think about what has happened. So you can be driving in your car, and you can forget what you're doing. How many of you have ever been driving, and then you get home from work, and you're like, I have no idea how I hope I didn't go through a light somewhere along the line? Because you weren't physically present. Or how many of you have had friends where you're having a perfectly good conversation, maybe you're at a dinner party or something like that, when we used to have dinner parties? I'm sorry, that was mean. Okay, so see now what I'm doing is I'm remembering dinner parties. But you remember you have a friend at these dinner parties, you're hanging out with a friend, and you'll be having a great old conversation, and all of a sudden you look over and Bob, he's just gone. He's not there. He's gone. He's left the building. He is no longer present, right? And in fact, he's just daydreaming or whatever, he's thinking about something else, and then you're like, hello, Earth to Bob, right? And he comes back, and you're like, hey, welcome back. We actually say, welcome back. And then we might even ask him, where were you just now? Oh, I was just thinking about the time I was landing on the moon. I was, whatever it is, in his particular case, Bob's a special case. So you understand, our minds can leave the present moment, past, present, future. We're hopping back and forth all the time between past, present, and future. It's a God-given faculty, right? This is what we do when we're planning our child's birthday party. Right? We're thinking, oh, okay, we're going to get the clown to come in and he's going to jump out and scare okay, maybe not. We won't have a clown. And you start working through the different things you're going to do for the birthday party. We're going to have a Franklin cake, and it's going to be so cute, and the candles, and we're going to have presents, and you can kind of picture it in your mind. What are you doing? You're traveling kind of in your mind into a future that you hope materializes. Right? This is what happens when, like a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks, or last weekend, wow, time is mush right now is the problem. A couple of weeks ago, last weekend, was Good Friday. And when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, or communion, however you put it in your tradition, what we're doing is we're trying, as best we know how, to leave the present moment, to reflect, to remember an event that happened 2,000 years ago, when Jesus died on the cross for our sins, rose from the grave. But I was speaking about that event on Good Friday, and I asked us to go back even further to King David, who hundreds of years earlier wrote a prophetic psalm about what Jesus would experience on the cross. And now we're looking back. See how this works? This is how God made our minds. I love how H.G. Wells put it so aptly in a story he called The Time Machine. He puts it this way. He says, we all have our time machines, don't we? Those that take us back are memories, and those that carry us forward are dreams. Now, the problem is that we don't just harness the positive power of our ability to time jump. What we often do, and this is why the research shows that the more we do it, the less happy we are, what we tend to do is we tend to use the negative power of our ability to leave the present moment. This is what we're doing when we rehash that difficult conversation we've had with our sister because she just never quite gets us. She never actually has. And she's still bringing up that thing from the past. And I can't believe that she would do such a thing. And this is what we're doing. And it's the same thing that we're doing when we leave the present moment to think about what's going to happen because our job loss and then we're going to run out of food and maybe we'll have to sell our house and we start to worry, our anxiety starts to compound. This is the same thing happening. We're time traveling. This is, and you might say, well, the definition said that we're thinking about things that aren't happening, but I am thinking about what's happening out there in the big old world. There are people dying and the virus is spreading. Okay, but wait. Maybe you did catch it, but do you have it? Like when you're sitting there in your living room thinking about all the terrible things that are happening, are those happening to you in the present? Or are you taking your mind somewhere that is causing you angst? See, this misuse of our time travel capabilities is what causes our anxiety to spike, our stress levels to rise, our discouragement to churn up into despair. We start to think, oh my goodness, this is what happened last time, it's going to happen again. We start to forecast like these self-fulfilling prophecies. Before we know it, we're bathing ourselves in anxious thoughts, in worry, in discouragement, in negativity. And what we need to realize is that every thought you choose to accept, every line of thought you choose to repeat, ends up creating a more profound, a more established neural pathway in your brain. This is science. This is not just religion or faith. This is not just metaphysical stuff. This is real science. The mental pathways we take create neural pathways in our brain. In other words, physical pathways in our brain. And the more that those are established, the more difficult it is for us to deviate from that old pattern of thinking, even if it's destructive. And what's also happening on a physiological level, as we're choosing negative thoughts, is chemicals and endorphins and all kinds of different hormones are being released in our brain based on our negative thinking. We often talk about how our brains are like the hardware of a computer. Maybe you've heard that before. And that our minds are like the software. Now, the crazy thing about this software-hardware arrangement is that our software can actually damage our hardware. If we choose those neural pathways and release enough of those chemicals that cause the negative emotions, we can get so used to that level of negativity can start to damage our brains and our ability to produce endorphins that produce the positive emotions in our hearts and lives. So this is really, really important to get our hands and our heads around. We're time travelers. Our minds leave the present moment. Okay? So let's review what some of these problems are. Number one, the more we do it, the less happy we are. So what tends to happen, here's the picture I want to leave with you. Many of us want to leave a positive carbon footprint, but imagine that your time traveling is like driving a Hummer. Okay, you're definitely leaving your carbon footprint, right? It's a gas guzzler, right? 11 miles to the gallon or some crazy thing, or 9. Just go, every time we time travel, it's guzzling. But what's it guzzling? It's guzzling your happiness. It's guzzling your joy. Because the more we do it, the less happy we are. The problem is that we can't just stop doing it, right? Now, before I get to that, I just want to give you a thought. And that is, you can only live in the present moment. You can only live in the present moment. Like, in other words, you can only think about living or you can live. So when you are rehashing that thing in the past, you're not living, you're thinking about life that you've lived. When you are worrying about the future, you're not living, you are worrying about something that will happen in the future. You can only live life or think about living life. You cannot do both at the same time. Now, it's good to think about your life, and it's good to think ahead. It's good to reflect on the past, but remember, there's something about the way we're doing it that means that we're guzzling our joy while we're doing it. And the more we do it, the less happy we are, because we're spending so little time in the present where life actually happens. So that's the first thing. Number one is the more we do it, the less happy we are, because you can only live in the present moment, and we're spending 47% of our time not in the present moment. The second one is that we can't just stop doing it, right? Again, this is a God-given faculty, nor should we stop doing it, because using our time travel properly is the only way we're going to find peace in the present. We've got to learn to do it more effectively in a productive and healthy way. Because here's the truth. You can only be at peace in the present if you're at peace with your past and your future. You can only be at peace in the present if you're at peace with your past and your future. Why? Because if you're not at peace with them, you're constantly going to be tempted to time travel into them and go through those patterns of unhealthy thinking, whether you're reflecting or whether you're looking ahead, and you're not going to be at peace in the present, and you're not going to be able to live in the present because you're going to be so busy in the past and the future. So we have to learn how to do this better. Now, there's a follower of Jesus early in Christianity. His name is Paul the Apostle. And the cool thing about Paul the Apostle is he started as a Jesus hater. He would literally grab the temple priests and he would go door to door and he'd find Christians, throw them in jail. Some of them were being executed, like one of the early martyrs of Christianity named Stephen. And so he was not a happy dude, but he met Jesus in a vision, did a 180, and started following Jesus. And as he was teaching people to follow Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, he gave them this advice. Now, what I'm going to share with you is going to show you what's wrong with our thinking and how to fix it. In other words, why we time travel so destructively, and the reverse of what I'm sharing and what he says is going to show us the pathway forward today. So here it is. He says, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do. So he's writing to Jews about Gentiles. It's less important than the actual content here. So he says, look, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility, that's the first word, of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God. Futility. That's the first word to describe our thinking. Now, at first, you might be a little bit defensive, going, my thoughts are not futile. Okay, I know you've got brilliant ideas, and you've probably put some Pinterest-worthy things on Instagram where they shouldn't be. They should be on Pinterest, whatever you're doing. During this crisis, I get it. You're smart. You're awesome. But I also know that there are things about you haven't been able to overcome. There are thinking patterns you are stuck in that you don't know how to break. There are habits you don't know how to pull out of. There's a futility to your thinking. It's like if you could have broken free from your thought pattern, you probably would have by now, if that were possible, right? This is something all of us can relate to. By the way, he says, don't live this way. In other words, even if you're a follower of Jesus, we often revert to old ways of thinking. Jesus teaches us a new way of thinking. I'm going to share that in a minute. So that's the first word, is futility. The second word is because you are darkened in your understanding, your thoughts are futile. In other words, you don't have the light, you don't have the insight, you don't have the perspective that you need. You're like bumping around in the dark, which explains a lot. Explains why we keep hitting our shin on the same coffee table, metaphorically speaking. It explains why we keep going around in circles and it becomes futile because we're in the dark, right? We're not making progress, and sometimes it feels like we're going down the bowl, right? Because we're in the dark. But then he gets to our biggest problem. He says that we are separated from the life of God. This is the source of all our problems. I hate to break it to you, but the solution isn't just a little more light. Like if I could just get a little more light in that darkened understanding, then my thinking and my efforts would not be futile. We're constantly looking for that leverage, for that killer insight, for that app, for that approach, that book, that self-help, whatever it is. This is not what I'm talking about today. Our core problem is that we're separated from the life of God. See, God is a perfectly joyous, peaceful being, the king of the universe, and being connected with the source of life and light is what gives us light, which makes our efforts transcend this futility that we've been trapped in. He says, your major problem is you're separated from God. This is why God sent Jesus, is to reconnect us with God. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, the problem can be that you're living as though you're disconnected from God, which is causing your darkened understanding, which is making everything you're trying futile. Okay, so this is what we have to address. This is what God is trying to fix. Now, we also have another problem, and that is that we have an enemy called the devil. And some of you might be thinking that's a supernatural kind of superstition. It's old world. It's not really what's happening. I tell you, once you understand that we've got an enemy that is duping people into taking out their vengeance on each other, that's keeping us in this dark and futile state, once you accept that as a reality, that you are under attack and someone wants you to stay in the dark, all kinds of other things make sense. But regardless, this is what Jesus says about this enemy. He says, the thief, that's the devil, comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But I, in other words, Jesus, have come that they may have life and have it to the full. You have an enemy that wants to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, here's the deal. He didn't come at you with fangs bared and wings flapping and coming. Generally speaking, this is not how he attacks us. What he loves to do is take advantage of our separation from God, the darkness of our thinking, and the futility of our actions, and he loves turning us on ourselves so that we're self-sabotaging. He loves helping us stay in the dark and at all costs stay separate from God, which is, by the way, why some of you are going, that's not my problem. I don't need that. I don't need religion. Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The enemy of your souls, the thief, cannot allow you to connect with Jesus, because if you do, your understanding will be enlightened and you'll be free from that futility. He doesn't want you there. I'm just telling you. But this is what the enemy does, right? He gets us to think separately from God, and then in our darkened understanding, come up with all kinds of attempts to fix ourselves, knowing that we're going to run around in circles, that it's all futile, and he sits back and goes, right? This is what he's doing. So don't play into his hand. This is why it's so important, and this is what tells us what Jesus wants for us. He wants us to have that full life. He wants us to understand how to handle our thinking, past, present, and future, so that we can thrive in the moment. And that's what I want to teach you to do during this series. So, let's go back. This is what God is calling us into. He wants to reconnect you with himself through Jesus, so that our thinking is enlightened instead of darkened, so that our thinking and our choosing becomes empowered by God. If we're connected to God, we can be empowered and enlightened by God. This is the plan that God has for you. Isn't that awesome? Here's what God wants to do. God wants to set you free from your past and your future so that you can thrive in the present. Now, I know I've unloaded a lot on you today. There's a lot for you to think about. So let me just break it down to one simple thing, Okay? Maybe you're not ready to give your life to Jesus yet. That's totally fine. You can follow with us. You don't have to do that. I'm not forcing myself on you. But what I'd like you to do is consider this. Consider that you're in a battle. Consider that maybe your understanding's darkened, that the futility that you're experiencing going around and around circles without any real progress could be related to the fact that you're disconnected from God, or living as though you're disconnected from God, and you're reaping the benefits or the downward spiral of that as a result. But I also would like you to do one practical thing this week, and here it is. Keep track of how often your mind leaves the present and where it goes when it goes. Keep track of how often your mind leaves the present and where it goes when it goes. Here's what's going to happen. This week, you're going to be thinking about what I've said, and you're going to be, just try to stay focused on the present. Just try to do it, even after we're done here today. And then you'll notice you're thinking about lunch. You go, oh, I did it. Oh, I went and thought about lunch. That was the future. And then you're going to think of this other thing you heard this other time when you're listening to this guy online, and oh, I'm in the past. And you're going to notice yourself time jumping. You're going to notice. So all I'm asking you to do this week is to become more aware of that, because as you do, you're going to become more equipped to do something about it. Now, next week, I'm so excited because next week I'm going to start introducing the 5 indisputable axioms of time travel. And because this metaphor of time travel, it just keeps getting better and better. And it's going to give you so much clarity on how to navigate your thoughts, how to deal with your past and your present so you can thrive in the future. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Manifest Live. Please like our channel, subscribe to our channel, share this content on Facebook, and don't forget to join us midweek on our Facebook page for an ongoing kind of video series. If you'd like to unpack what we're talking about here today in a more in-depth way from the scriptures, I'm going to be tracing the life of Joseph in the Old Testament and showing how these principles are so clearly illustrated in his life. So have an amazing week. Please join us. That'll be Thursdays for that follow-up for Manifest Midweek. Have an amazing day.